So good evening and welcome everybody to a fantastic event to celebrate and mark International Non-Binary People's Day. My name is Neil Hudson-Basing. I'm the Corporate Events Manager for LSBU and delighted to be joined by our very special guest today, Jamie Windust. Jamie is an award-winning author, model, presenter, editor, fashion icon. Jamie, have I missed anything? No, we're all good. I can carry on. And all-round awesome human. So welcome, Jamie. I'm going to take you through some Zoom functionality and housekeeping, starting with our short statement on respect and dignity. Everyone speaking at or attending an LSBU event, whether in person or virtually, should be treated with respect, dignity, and courtesy. LSBU operates an environment built on equality, inclusion, and acceptance. We value contributions, feedback, and comments, and wish to create a space for sharing, learning, celebrating, and bringing communities together. LSBU does not tolerate any form of bullying, abuse, harassment, or discrimination. Inappropriate behaviour, including that potentially impacts or contradicts LSBU's reputation and values, will be treated seriously and acted upon. Anyone exhibiting any example of this behaviour will also be removed from the webinar. We want our events to be an enjoyable, safe, and warm experience for all. Thank you for adhering to these guidelines. So just to take you through the Zoom functionality, there's the chat box, and it'd be great to see you using that throughout to share your thoughts and comments. Please let us know who you are, what you do, where you're joining us from, and really use that to help us break down the virtual wall that we're all experiencing at the moment. You'll see that I've enabled closed captioning, which are the subtitles that are appearing on your screen. If you don't wish to see those, you can hide them by clicking the little up arrow next to the CC Live transcript button at the bottom of the screen. You can change the view throughout the event. So you can spotlight people, you can have it in gallery view or single speaker view. And you can do that with the little button that says view in the top right-hand corner of your screen. So you can change the view whoever you want to see on screen. And then finally, this session is going to be recorded. So if you do not wish to feature in the recording, please don't turn your camera on. Communicate through the chat box, but if you're happy to ask a live question, we'd love to get some live conversation going. And to ask a live question later, simply pop your camera and mic on and we'll come to you next. Finally, please share your thoughts and comments on Twitter, and I'll share our hashtag and Twitter handle in the chat box shortly. I'd now like to hand over to my colleague Alan for some scene setting. Alan, over to you.
Thanks, Neil, and welcome everyone. And thanks for joining us. I've got some little notes that I'm going to keep referring back to over here. But thanks to London South Bank University this evening for encouraging and supporting events like the one that you're attending tonight. And to our volunteers at Sonnet, which is LSBU's LGBTQ and Allies staff network. This evening's event is part of the LGBTQ+ Thought Leaders at LSBU series. Sorry, I've just lost what I was saying there. Where we're joined by guests from around the world who have made and or are making meaningful contributions in their various fields. And if you're interested to follow up tonight's event, you can find recordings of talks from Raewyn Connell, Jeffrey Weeks, Lady Phil Opokujima, and Mike Sarna on our LGBTQ+ Thought Leaders YouTube channel. So one of our objectives as a staff network is to facilitate connections across the LSBU group and to help people to meet and to share ideas outside of their own departments, divisions, and areas of responsibility, as well as with connecting with the wider community outside of the university as well. So again, thanks. If you're new to an LSBU event, then welcome, especially to you. Tonight is very special for the series in a few ways. First, we're queering or disrupting or making fuzzier some of those distinctions between some of the more traditional hierarchies or roles that people have in our knowledge creation community that is London South Bank University. And so we're very, very pleased to be joined this evening by Susie Ray. Susie is currently doing the research for their MSc psychology dissertation with us, exploring help-seeking behavior for gender non-conforming young people in the UK, and will be responding to Jamie's talk and hosting the Q&A, the in conversation with part of this evening's event. And of course, we're joined by Jamie Windust. I think, Neil, you've stolen my introduction, but Jamie has written a book called In Their Shoes, Navigating Non-Binary Life, which has been described as frank, funny, and brilliantly feisty, a must-read book and a call to arms for non-binary self-acceptance, self-appreciation, and self-celebration. Jamie also has experience as an editor, a model, and a recognized member of the British social media. And so this evening is going to share some of their thoughts, ideas, and insight on creating your own personal brand. So with that, thanks for joining us, and a warm welcome to Jamie Windust.
Thank you, Alan. I'm thoroughly enjoying that description of the British being part of the British social media. I will take that, and I will plaster that everywhere. It is a privilege to be here. I sorely miss scouring the universities of the UK on trains that I didn't even realize this happened, but on trains that up north you have to open the doors yourself. You think I'd learn a lot from going to the university. Oh, no. I learn a lot just from getting there. So I do miss being back in spaces, but hopefully as the new term starts again in September, we can get back to doing some more in-person events. And of course, with London Pride this year being in September, hopefully things might be a little bit more back to normal. Now, as Alan and Neil very kindly shared, I will be talking about this idea of personal branding. Now, as someone who has gone through many facets of what could be described as a personal brand or a personal mistake, a personal era, a personal montage of time with a certain face and a certain look, I definitely understand the pitfalls and the perils, yet the pros and the brilliance of self-branding. Now, just a little bit about where this idea came from. It's not just because I am incredibly narcissistic. It began in this space at university for me. So I studied fashion management and marketing and business at the University for the Creative Arts in Epsom. And in my final year, we had a really interesting brief that essentially was branding. So we were asked to create any form of product. It could be absolutely anything, basically just asked to create a business in your final term. That can be a hypothetical business, that can be something that you continue. And alongside this unit, we had a section of work that essentially prepared us for the real world. I noticed that this was something that a lot of university students speak about, and I wrote about it in my book about this idea of kind of when you finish university, it can often feel like you're falling off a bit of a cliff and kind of jump into the real world. It reminds me of just kind of that scary like abyss feeling of like, where am I going to go? Especially now as so many of our sectors are up in the air or it's not necessarily security. So I had this personal branding year, essentially, where I was asked to brand myself in professional but also personal ways to allow myself to be able to show the skills that I have to offer in the fashion world primarily. And what I found really interesting about this was that whenever I would go and see people or see my lecturers or see the specialists that we had come in and they would sit down with me and we'd really kind of get to the root of what they thought my personal brand was, their instantaneous kind of reaction to myself was that, well, your gender identity and your sexuality and your queerness must be a huge part of your personal brand. And, as a young person at this age, I was, 19, 20, I'd kind of been out as non-binary for about 2.5 years. And it was something that, although they had a point, although yes, my gender identity and my sexuality do make up a large part of who I am, I think what I can only really look at now and realize is that that was an assumption or an expectation that was placed upon me because I had been so open about my sexuality and my gender identity through my work. So at university, so in that final year, I created a magazine, Fruitcake Magazine, which I continued for 2 years post university, and that led me into my career in the media. But because I had been so kind of vocal about wanting to create a LGBTQ plus trans queer safe space with this magazine, people just kind of presumed that that was in me all the time, and that that was, you know, a real marker of everything about me. And just to break that down a little bit more, of course, as I said, of course it is. And it's very important. As people within the community, we know how important our own identities are to us and how we hold them very dear. But what I had forgotten, and then what I think got misplaced in this time and over the past 3-4 years, is this idea that I was assuming or living in people's expectations of what they wanted my personal brand to be. I was living in a way that was to fulfill what other people wanted me to do rather than always doing what I actually wanted to do. And yes, I obviously, as a trans person, as a queer person, I think for me personally, and that's really important for me, I am happy at certain times to share my experience of being a trans person. It does not mean that that's all I should be expected to do. And I think with a personal brand, there has to be a facet to it that includes things that aren't even necessarily to do with your gender identity, but are to do with what you love and what you love doing. This year, I've really, you know, and last year specifically, when everything was stripped back, I got to look at this idea of what my personal brand is. And I realized that so much of it was born through fear. It was born through fear of not being seen as successful. So I would do lots of things that I didn't necessarily want to do, but I did them because I wanted to be seen in a certain way, or I did things because I felt like there was pressure on me as a figure in the community, I guess, to say these things and do these things. I felt immense pressure. What I realized last year when I stripped that all back is the core of what my brand is essentially, and everyone has a brand. It's quite a cringy thing to say, but everyone has a brand, and another name for that is just an ethos or a mentality or a vision. Is it has to start with an intention that you want to do this because you love doing this. You cannot let other people dictate what your personal brand is, what your ethos is, because then you're doing it for someone else. You're pedestaling someone else, and if they falter or if they fail or if they suddenly change their mind, they have you on their puppet strings and you will change accordingly. And that's not a way to live a life. And that is partly how I lived my life for a long time. And after releasing my book last year, which was, you know, very focused on navigating non-binary life, I realized that I wanted to put that to bed in a way. I wanted to put this idea that so much of my work had to essentially pull at a thread of my identity all of the time, and just really focus on what I enjoy doing, what I love doing. And in the past year, I've gotten more into hosting and presenting and showing more of my personality, you know, more of my actual personality, and more of my wit and more of my stupidity and more of my just nonchalance, as it were. And it's been really fun. It's been really fun to just learn new things about myself at an age where, you know, you think that you kind of have everything together and everything's kind of forming quite nice structures, and you think, okay, well, I must have something together here. It's absolutely fine to go to any age and be like, do you know what? I'm just going to find out what I really like doing, what I love doing. That doesn't cause me emotional labor. That doesn't always have to cause me emotional pain, or I don't have to always relive trauma to be useful. And that's been really nourishing. It's been really nice to do that, especially in environments like at university, for example, or in the media or in the creative arts, where lots of people take their identity and use it to allow other people to learn from them. I would never tell people to not do that. I would just say, really make sure that if your authentic ethos and drive is to educate the world and to be an activist, then you really need to make sure that you have the foundations to help you stay strong as a person, because it does take its toll. The world we live in is unfortunately cruel. And it's important that if that is your message, that you have such a strong support system from within yourself, but also from those around you to help you in that, because I didn't. And I also did, it wasn't my ethos. So I had so many things against me in a way where I was doing it because I wanted to do it, but I also felt pressured to do it, and I didn't have a support system. And it was tough. And now I'm in an absolutely far better place, taking my time, living a slower pace of life, because I'm not needing to say yes to everything. I'm not always feeling the need to have to educate people. And I understand that part of that comes with privilege, absolutely. And it comes with, it's not going to happen straight away. I've been in the media industry for 5 years now, and I've only just got to a position where I can kind of really look at what I'm doing and think, do I want to do this? Do I not want to do this? Of course, at the beginning, I just said yes to everything because I wanted to get out there, and that's fine. But no matter what you end up doing, you just have to make sure you have that foundation of support for yourself and other people that can help you if that fails, no matter what you end up doing. And to wrap on that, I think it's just before the Q&A with Susie, I think it's really important that we have fun with it. I've kind of got a bit sick of saying that over the past year, but since August last year, I really realized that so much of our time as LGBTQ plus people, and trans people specifically, is spent stressed. It's spent worrying. It's spent bombarded with news. It's spent in a state of kind of frustration with the narratives that are going on, kind of feeling helpless. And what I had to do was think, this is quite a recent revelation, shall we say, but I had to really think, can I control what everyone thinks about me or my community? No, I can't control it. Do I need to control it? Is it just down to me to control the narrative of my community? No. Can I play a part in this? Yes, absolutely. And can I control that part? Can I control how much influence I have in this space? Yes. And as soon as I realized that all I can control is what I do, I can't control what everyone else does. It allows me to calm. It allows me to reset. It allows me to slow down when there's so much news coming out, because I can't control that. And it's not up to me as the marginalized voice in the system, I guess, to need to control that. That's why allies are so important. So I will leave that there. Thank you very much for listening. And I will invite the lovely Susie Ray to come and chew my ear off and ask me some lovely questions.
Hi, Jamie. Thank you so much. That was brilliant. That was really, really interesting. Oh God, that's my face. Sorry. I really loved what you were saying towards the end about just having fun with it, because you and I, for anyone who didn't know, we did a podcast last week where we talked about queer media. If anyone wants to go and do that, I'm sure Neil can bung it in the chat wherever that is. And we talked a little bit about this idea that everything feels so caught up in this this bit, the hard bits of being queer. There's so much transphobia going on everywhere. All of these, like your J.K. Rowlings and your, I don't know if I can name drop that. And I think it is quite hard. It's easy to get caught up in that. And I really love this push to kind of focus on the joy of it and the happiness of it in the community. So I really love that. That's great.
Thank you. Yeah, no, when I joined, I joined Gay Times last summer as contributing editor, and it was a time when there was so much, the J.K. Rowling stuff was really popping off. There was lots of very specific trans-related issues that were going around, and it was really lovely to be in a position where I could, in whatever part, like I said at the end there, controls a small part of that narrative. And for me, that was showing trans couples and trans relationships and how they're mundane and how they're boring and how they're silly and how they're fun and how they have, we have the same arguments, trans couples have the same arguments that cis couples have, and we both equally hate taking the bins, like, all of those stupid things. Like, I just want to kind of humanize the conversation sometimes because it's so dehumanizing.
Yeah, for sure. And one thing I've always said to people is that I think my gender identity is one of the least interesting things about me, and people do get caught up in this one thing about you and can't see past that. And I mean, do you find that you ever struggle to get, as someone who's, you're a writer, you're in everything, writer, model, everything, do you find that you sometimes struggle to get commissioned to do things that aren't about gender or about sexuality?
Yeah, massively. I mean, that's very pertinent for me right now. I'm trying to, for about 3 or 4 months, I've been going through kind of the cycle of being commissioned to write another book. And it's really, now I can see it. It's so clear to me that this expectation trap almost, and it's not necessarily anyone's fault. It's not people being malicious, but every single time that I go through this process of pitching my idea, writing a proposal, kind of starting a sample chapter for my new book, and then it coming back and it kind of being like, could you add, like, is there any way that you could make it like more trans focused, or what about strapping that and doing something on the trans debate, or and things like that, which I can completely understand why you'd say that. And I also have to acknowledge that these people, although they may have my intentions and my cares in there somewhere, they're also a business. They're looking for something that's going to sell. And I understand that. But it does get very frustrating, because I do feel sometimes, as a trans author, but as a trans kind of person in the media, I do have to prove myself that little bit more when I want to talk about something that isn't trans focused, because people always pose the question, why you? Why would I come to you for this? And why would I not go to someone who specializes in this? And I do find that difficult.
Yeah, I think that's quite a common problem for really any marginalized voices as people go. I know that a lot of, for example, people of color really struggle to write a book that's not specifically about that experience. Which is obviously really difficult, because as marginalized voices, as queer people, we have other stuff to say, we have other stuff to do. Another question I had was, because your brand is obviously about you, do you find that there's a distinction between you as a brand and you as a person? Is there a line of what you show publicly and what you don't? And does that line ever get blurry?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's, again, it was a huge learning process when I realized it was kind of like 2.5 years ago, I got to a point with my management, actually, and they were kind of, I noticed very kind of small things, but it was when they would talk about me to me as if I was another person. So they would essentially just talk about me in the third person, but as if I was some like entity. Or being in meetings and hearing people talk about me, even though I'm sat there. I did find it very difficult, because again, you're essentially just hearing what other people expect from you. And especially in quite like a social media heavy and business and creative focused space, you are treated as a product quite a lot of the time. And it is quite hard sometimes to think they're talking about me as if I am some like machine that can just create, or I am something that they can, I'm a resource, you know. It is difficult. And I think in terms of keeping things to myself and knowing what to share, that has been, again, quite a recent discovery of realizing what do people need to know about me and what do people not need to know. And also have to question, why am I sharing that? Is it for validation? Is it because I want everyone to feel sorry for me? Is it because I want to be seen in a particular way? Like, what, I have to question my motives when I share things outwardly. Because there's a definite difference between being honest all of the time and telling the truth. That might sound a bit twatish, but like there's a line between like being honest and then just saying everything about your life because you want to. There has to be a boundary.
Do you find with having like quite a big audience as well that there's this kind of expectation from you to share everything? Do people feel like they've got unfettered access to you? Do you ever feel like you have to draw these boundaries between this is the me that you get and this is private?
Yeah, 100%. I think I get messages, you know, lots of messages daily of people kind of being well-intentioned, but again, not understanding that there is a boundary there. Just because and this isn't just specific to me, it's to anyone online, but just because you have an affinity or a relation to someone online does not mean that you know them. And it also does not mean that they should give you their time, or you should be able to access their time and energy. And that's not in a pretentious way. That's just in a preservation way. You know, I know sometimes the analogy feels slightly moot when you say it like this, but you know, would you do that to someone in the street? Like, would you go up to someone and like make them read a piece of paper? Probably not. And yeah, it's difficult because like I say, a lot of these people are very well intentioned. They want me to share resources. They want me to share things they're working on, and I, you know, I do, but there also has to be an understanding that I can't do that all the time. And there's an emotional toll to it.
Yeah, completely. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of, I guess, emotional labor. Have you found, what's the best ways you found of drawing those boundaries? Is it explicitly just saying them, you know, putting them out there and saying, you can't access me all the time, or are there other ways that you found of doing that?
Yeah, definitely. There has to be some form of, you have to vocalize these things sometimes. What I've found in the past and what I'm realizing now is if I have an issue with someone, whether that be online or in person, that I feel is maybe crossing a boundary of mine, if I say nothing, that will just turn into a resentment for that person. And I will resent the fact that they're continuing to do something, despite the fact that I haven't been honest and kind and said, hello, you know, there's always a way to say things kindly. Hello, thanks for this. Would appreciate if you know, this was the last message you sent me, or I'm not open to receiving these types of messages, because then you don't cause yourself pain by harboring this kind of resentment towards someone, all because I didn't just very politely say, you know, thanks, but no thanks. And yeah, you know, it's like taking the poison and expecting the other person to die. You're not gonna get anywhere if you just sit angry at people without them even knowing it.
Yeah, that's true. So you talked a bit as well about how your brand changed and how, especially since doing your book, it's been evolving a bit. How much of that change would you say is a conscious change, and how much do you think that's just evolving naturally? Because obviously you started building this brand as a student, you are not the same person you were as a student. What would you say the balance is between it being conscious and it being organic?
Yeah, great question. It's like you say, and lots of people in their careers evolve, people just change. I think there is a definite conscious choice when it comes to the amount of work that I do that is trans specific, because that was my main focus, where I realized it's causing me quite a lot of pain, and quite a lot of emotional pain and labor. So that has been quite a conscious effort. I only really write about trans specific issues if it's not about me. I think that's what I was doing, as I was, there's lots of things wrong with that. It was difficult for me as a person to use my own lived experience all of the time. But also it was very privileged. I had the privilege of being able to know in certain circumstances that my story people would want to hear my story, and that isn't always the case for lots of trans people. And I had to realize that this wasn't necessary, and I can still write, and I still do. I write about trans issues at the moment. We've got a really interesting investigative piece coming out next week with Gay Times, about trans, gay, and bisexual men in the community, and it's great because it's not directly about my experience. I'm sharing other people's experiences, and making sure that they are looked after as best they can be, because I know what it's like when you put yourself out there. So I'm really making sure that the whole process now and what I work on is quite holistic, and that people are cared for, because the media can be quite brutal sometimes when it kind of just extracts the person's story, puts it out to the world, and then leaves them to just kind of reflect by themselves. It can be very isolating.
Yeah, and I guess there is also this aspect of when there's not a massive amount of non-binary representation at the moment in the general public, you become this representative. I've had some kind of stroke. I'm sorry. Representative of all non-binary people. There's kind of like, you are the figurehead, which is obviously a huge, huge toll on you, and also is difficult for other non-binary people who are looking to that and not necessarily seeing themselves reflected. So I guess it's more about getting more about voices and more diverse voices, rather than just putting it all in one person and being like, why are you not being non-binary enough, or in the right way or the wrong way?
100%. There's, like you say, there's pros and cons. No, wrong words. It's catching. There's cons.
Sorry.
Yeah, there's two types of negatives for putting all of that pressure on one person, is that it impacts me directly, and it also creates a dynamic, like you say, where there can be certain circumstances where my image, my whiteness, my kind of palatability is then seen as the default for what non-binary is. And that took me a while to realize, as I've kind of figured out the industries and realized, speaking to other trans and non-binary people of color, and realizing that it wasn't the same. We've all been on a learning experience for the past 3 or 4 years, and I think it's really there's so many benefits of me essentially shutting up or just stepping back, because I don't need to fulfill the expectation that other people have of me anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to me, it's less about you having to shut up and more about the space being widened, that it's not just this very narrow space that allows one or two, as you say, palatable non-binary people. Sorry, it's a motorbike. Palatable non-binary people. It's about broadening that space and making room for more voices and more diverse voices, which is not just down to one person's job. That's in every space in media and academia. I think it's really important to do that, and we're gradually going in the right direction, but there's more to be done. So I did have another question and I have lost it on my list. Oh, yes. So you were talking about when you first started, you were very much saying yes to everything. And over the course of your career, learned that you don't have to. What would you say was that tipping point of realizing that you don't have to say yes to everything? You can say no. Or yes, but maybe.
Yeah, there's a definite shift, and I think it was when I realized that it was causing me pain. I don't think I realized actually at the time. I thought it was maybe pain from sharing my experiences, or whether that be, you know, on stage speaking to groups of people or through articles. Like, I found it really interesting to work out, was this pain because that's just what happens when you do this, or was there a way to actually avoid this? Do I need to go through this? Essentially, could I get this message out there without feeling like I'm kind of opening up my chest for the world to look in? And you know, I realized there's so many ways. If you look at the creativity of our community, you know, look on the South Bank Centre, for example, or spaces where creativity is so intertwined with identity. Like I was saying at the beginning, people can make sure that they get a message out there without it having to always be so painful. When I realized that, you know, when I realized that everything I say is going to have a trans lens to it, but it doesn't always have to be painful. It can be funny, or it can be like, for example, the past year or so, it's been a lot more creative. It's been a lot more fashion, beauty focused, which, yeah, is slightly futile sometimes, but it's very fun and I enjoy it. And it's great to see that side of my modeling career kind of increase and have fun, because it's not as painful. And like I said, it's still going to have that trans lens to it because it's coming from me. I don't have to shout about or constantly relive trauma to validate the fact that I am trans. I just am. And it's like you said earlier, it's a bit of a byproduct. It's a bit boring, actually, in this industry, especially.
It's nice though. It's positive. I really like that. I have one last question and then I will stop talking and we can open up to everyone else. Kind of going back to what you were saying about managing expectations, do you find that the expectations coming at you from the queer community are different from the expectations coming at you from maybe the more mainstream audience?
Great question. Yeah, I think there are definitely similarities. Like, I still get this. So one of the most frequently asked questions that I get, that I would say I notice comes from the non-queer audience and the queer audience, is like how to be a good ally. And I always, you know, I've stopped answering that question because it's boring, but and it's painful. You know, an example of a painful question. So apologies if anyone was about to write that in the Q&A box. But yeah, there's a similarity there because there's lots of people both within and outside of the community that need or want to be allies and should be allies. I think the expectation from within the queer community is almost that I am pedestaled a lot more than outside of. So I am kind of put to a much higher standard of authority, I guess, from within the community than I am outside of. The conversations that I have within my own community, those expectations were often, you have to be perfect, you have to know absolutely everything, you have to say all of the right things, and if you don't, then there's no point in you being here. Whereas in the kind of non-queer world, the expectation almost was a little bit like the bare minimum. Like, they just wanted me to be quite like introductory with my information, or they wanted me to just be really open about things. And there was a lot of learning, obviously, not to dismiss the queer community. That's only a very small section of the community that have that mindset of people who sometimes use their voice on a platform, they suddenly kind of herald them as kind of, you know, can never do any wrong. But it's nice and interesting in a way to see that on social media change over the past year. You know, we're all, in the past few years, we're all learning publicly. You know, there are a certain sector of people that are learning publicly, and I think if we all encourage everyone to do that, just to learn outwardly without judgment, to a certain extent, obviously, then I think that would be a lot more cohesive.
Yeah, I feel like that's almost we could almost do a whole other conversation just on that, on this, like the moral standards put on queer people and generally marginalized voices that aren't from within their own communities. Like that could almost be its own conversation in itself. There's so much to say there. But for now, I'll calm down. And if there's anything else you want to add that I haven't touched upon, please feel free to say, and otherwise I think we can open up to questions if, Neil, you're happy with that. Oh, you're on mute.
I'm on mute. Absolutely happy to open up to questions. So if anyone has a question, and there's been a couple of comments and one question in the chat box, please do feel free to pop your camera and mic on, and we will come to you shortly. And we'd love to get some live conversation going. So do feel free to join us on screen. Alternatively, you are welcome to use the chat box if you're more comfortable in doing so. Alan, would you like to kick us off?
Yeah, that's great. And thanks to both of you, Jamie and Susie, for just, I think, a really, you know, very, very authentic kind of start to the conversation tonight. And I was really interested in some of the, again, the queerness and the blending or the fuzziness. And when I talk about, you know, queering and queerness, I'm talking about these non-binary distinctions between these either or, this or that kind of thinking. And I'm, you know, totally mansplaining that maybe for someone in the audience who's new to queer theory. But you talked about brand versus identity, brand versus product, and the different reference that you have for brand. I think it was something that was really interesting for me. And I thought, but was wondering, maybe could you elaborate or comment a little bit more on the meaning that we give to the idea of brand in these different spheres, both public and private?
Absolutely, yeah, great question. I think when I think of the concept of a brand, you know, my head initially goes to exactly what you and Neil read out at the beginning. That kind of spiel is essentially what I brand myself as a product, if I was to be crass. You know, that is how I would brand myself as a professional. That's my kind of professional brand. Personal brand, I think, is where, like you said, the language can change. It's exactly like a personal ethos or a personal mantra or way of life. I think if we you can look at your personal brand in any way you like. It can be a brand that is just for you, or it can be your professional personal brand, you know, where there's a lot more merging, like you're saying. But for me, they both have to intersect, and they both have to have a kind of a combining thread, and that thread is that they both come from a place of intention, of me actually enjoying what I do. If neither of them have a thread that says you actually enjoy this, then I kind of fall into a trap of like, well, why am I doing this? That's not to say that I only ever do things that I like doing. Obviously, we've all done our taxes, or, you know, things crop up that I don't enjoy doing. I would just refuse to do them. But in terms of long-term kind of professional opportunities, I really have to make sure that I love what I'm doing. Yeah, great question though.
And how very dare you assume that I don't love doing my taxes. So
I didn't want to presume. There is the glasses.
But maybe we can because you talked about studying, was it fashion and business, and some of the, maybe some of the marketing theory, and Susie with some of the psychology theory. I'm interested to maybe pull out some threads from what you're saying around the message having to be very direct. You know, this lens through which you speak and deliver a message through transness or queerness or the non-binary identity, whether it's direct or whether it's also a message that we can be amplifying and supporting just by being visible and talking about those other things. So for me, and I kind of had to turn away a little bit to remind myself of the terms, but you know, we would frame that as elaboration likelihood model versus the heuristic systematic model, and to make those distinctions between, you know, what's your message just by being visible as opposed to having to speak about it directly. Did you want to maybe frame some of that direction that you're taking now about those different paths?
Sure, I love that there's actual words for these things. I I find that really interesting. Yeah, there's a definite dynamic where it's like in the more creative elements of my job, in the fashion and modeling side. Yes, there are, you know, especially in the past month or so, there's been very, like you say, direct situations where almost like I learned in my degree, you know, direct to consumer. It's something that, a message that people want either me or a brand to send straight to the consumer. They don't want any faff. They don't want any kind of like, oh, Jamie's non-binary, so you can kind of pick that up in the ether. They want like, what does it mean? How can, you know, all of those things. And like I said earlier, there's certain times where I'll happily do that, and Pride Month is one of them. But equally, I think there is absolute merit in this idea that, in that second idea you were talking about, and for me that manifests itself in terms of production. If a production on a shoot or a production on a writing team or an editorial team has trans people both behind and in front of the camera, then that idea of what you said of kind of representing and getting something from someone just by being there and just by being visible, that's a great example of that. Because whenever I'm on a set that is completely full of trans professionals, they don't have to sit there and you know, wave their flag, but I know it, I sense it, and I get the energy from it, and it creates such a cohesive environment. And both have equal merit, both have equal power. I guess what they both don't have is frequency. You know, the frequency of the direct to consumer is far higher than the let's just make an inclusive environment and then the conversations will be natural. You know, it's much more tell us what you are, tell us directly what you want us to know. I'd like to see the shift.
Thank you. Juan, do we have a question from you?
Hi, yes. I would just like to ask, how do you deal with hostility from cisgendered people who feel that when you proclaim you're non-binary, are trying to completely erase, you know, their identity going forward? You know, do you experience that at all in the workspace or on a day-to-day basis? I know personally I identify as cisgendered, but I would never dismiss your experience over mine or try to say one's over the other. So I just want to know how you would approach that kind of situation going forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Juan. Yeah, it's definitely, there's definite instances of it. One of the actual main reasons why I decided to work for myself was because I was fearful of receiving workplace discrimination, which is obviously not ideal. And And I definitely, in my workspaces, I definitely have experienced workplace discrimination, but it's not as overt as kind of public discrimination in more public sector spaces. So like transport or shopping or just being out and about. Like it is a real day-to-day battle. But equally, what I have to remember is, like I said at the end there, can I change what this person thinks about me? Potentially, but probably not. Is there anything, does it say anything about me? Does this random person who I don't know, very harsh or being very judgmental, does it actually say anything about me? No, because I don't know this person. And I do, you know, it's quite a tiring process to have to go through, but it happens a lot. And I had to build that foundation of support for myself, because otherwise I would let every comment, every look kind of berate me. And I changed my look quite dramatically because I received so much prejudice. And you might say that that's a bit sad, and yeah, it is a bit sad because I looked great, but I realized, what can I change? You know, what could I change but still keep authentically me? And that was me learning how to express myself in a way that I felt as comfortable in, but didn't cause me as much pain. And, you know, sometimes we have to make compromises for our own mental sanity and mental health. And that's what I did. So yeah, it is a struggle, but as kind of is the theme of tonight, it is slowly getting somewhat better. But thank you for your question.
Thank you, and thank you, Jamie. And I've got just a couple of observations. And you talked about your gripe about the question, how can I be a good ally? And completely understand that. I guess in this day and age where technology and so many stories are there to be read, it can be seen as a bit of a lazy question. It's something that other minorities and marginalized people have said as well at various other events that we've had at LSBU. Another common thread is that you spoke about is it's not your job to educate people. And it kind of the emotional trauma, and Alan, we've spoken about that in the work that's some of what we do. There is that kind of like you can't just walk away from something and just switch it off. So where was that changing point for you that you realize, I cannot do this anymore? I cannot spend my whole life doing this. But on the flip side of that, what do you think are the big things that need to change in order for us to progress as a society in terms of acceptance and understanding and awareness?
Yeah, no, definitely. There's the moment that kind of, I guess, was my catalyst and being like, I can't do this was last summer, because I realized that there was something that wasn't necessarily directly work related, that was traumatic, occurred, that I noticed was intrinsically linked to the fact that I was stressed from work. So something, a chain of events happened because I was so stressed from work. And it was Pride Month, and I was like, I since I've been in London, I've not actually ever had a Pride Month where I've not get out your tiny violins, but like a Pride Month where I've not worked or seen it as like a solid work month. I've not ever been in a space where there is a Pride celebration, and I've just been able to just be like, cool, let's go and just like relax for a bit. I know that sounds very woe is me, but like I realized that this shouldn't be my work. Like you said, the lines of being able to leave it at the office, as it were, there was no line. And what I ended up doing was, yes, this isn't my job. It's not my job to educate people until it is my job. You know, until I decide that that this is a job. Like tonight, like this, for example, you know, this is me working. I've actively chosen to do this, and that's great. Yeah, you know, and that's absolutely fine. I feel no expectation to do this. I felt, well, you know, having that mindset of like choice essentially is brilliant. I guess in terms of progress that I'd like to see, it would be what I touched upon on Alan's question, is making sure that there isn't always this idea of like overt representation, and that it's just very intrinsic, almost streamlined representation in our industries. A lot of talks over this Pride Month have been about on workplace inclusion, have been, I found really interesting, is looking at, yes, we want trans people in the workplace, but we also have to think, where are these trans people entering the workplace? You know, it's all well and good having trans people in your in one's business, but if those people are just going in at an incredibly low level, or an unskilled level, as it were, you know, to use their language, you have to question, is that actually representation, or are you just manipulating the system? We need trans people in positions of power so that there's balance. Similar with people of color, with women of color, you know, you can't just hire marginalized groups of people so that on your roster it looks cozy, when actually all of these people just represent an incredibly small and unfortunately low influential group in a workspace. That's what I'd like to see change.
Thank you. Nora, you had your hand raised.
Yes, hello.
Hi.
I just want to say I think you look absolutely wonderful. I love your outfit. I love the glasses, everything. It looks beautiful.
Well,
How's it been going? Like creativity, has like the personal branding you felt like really had a really positive benefit for you to actually, you know, be able to push your creative vision in fashion and, you know, your work?
great question. Yeah, it's been really interesting. I've been doing things that I never thought I'd do, which includes wearing shoes that do not have a heel on. Never thought I would be the type of person that would wear a flat shoe. But here we are. It's been really interesting to explore my own creativity again, but this time really with no rules. You know, before there obviously was no rules, and I was just having fun, experimenting, and that kind of came out, as it were, in quite a high femme / androgynous look. Whereas now it feels equally as comfortable, but it's just a different version. And to be able to spend lockdown finding that was lovely. You know, I don't think we'll ever get a period of time like that again, to really almost like hibernate from the judgment of the world. You know, if I took my phone away, if I put my phone in a drawer, I would have no judgment or expectation from other people, because it's literally just me. Which, yes, is obviously isolating, and there's lots of cons to that. But in terms of like harboring a sense of self, it's incredibly rare and incredibly an opportunity that I was like, well, I need to have a look at this and investigate this, so I can come out the other side not as mentally drained as I was entering 2020. But yeah, thank you. Great question.
No, of course. Thank you.
Thank you. You can definitely see that sense of fun. You know, follow you on Insta, and you can definitely see that sense of fun and no rules with some of the kind of stuff you've put out there recently, in terms of kind of like your looks. You know, the Jameela Jamil stuff that you did was absolutely brilliant. The Tom Allen one specifically had me in stitches. Just so much fun. Alan or Susie, do you have a question? Do you have any more questions?
Well, and I did. I wanted to just kind of pick up on some of the things that you've been talking about. But when we're talking about intersectionality, one of the things that makes you quite unique in our speaker series is your youth. And that's maybe surprising for a university community, but for our LGBTQ plus events, we've had these very hallowed and esteemed speakers. But I think everyone, I don't want to age anyone, but they're all at least children of the 70s or earlier. How does youth play into your brand, and how does that play long term for you, do you think?
Thank you. I'm not going to give my age away, but I was born the year Princess Diana passed, shall we say. So it's always very interesting for me there's no coincidences there, that I was birthed at that point in time. For me, I find age really interesting because people have such a presumption or expectation about my generation. And actually, in this instance, quite a lot of it is true, not in a comparative way to say that the generations prior to me do not have this kind of change mentality or real energetic activist mentality. But there is a definite shift in the younger generation that there's maybe more vocality, there's more resources. I don't think, you say a child of the 70s, there was so much political and social movement in the 70s that I think the young people of now still have that, but our resources have just changed. We just have different ways of making that noise. What I really like about being 8 years old is the fact that I can look at, and I don't mean this in a patronizing way, but creating intergenerational conversations, because there isn't that space. Even now, campaigns or talks or series will book a series of beautiful 20-somethings, which is fine if that's your audience. But I find it so much more fascinating, as Neil said with the series, to sit down with people that lived through the AIDS crisis, or lived through Section 28, or lived through a period of time where decriminalization hadn't happened, or there was strong conversion therapy still, stronger than now. I find that way more interesting to listen to than to almost cohesively listen to the three people, say, at a panel who all have a similar experience of age. Yeah.
I agree with that value, Reese, like completely, that intergenerational learning. And I think it's something that is sometimes overlooked with young people today. I went to Trans Pride recently and was walking, I ended up talking to Adele Anderson from Fascinating Aida. And Adele was telling me how when she came out as trans, the Gay Liberation Front kicked her out. And it was so fascinating to just talk to Adele, and she introduced me to a couple of other old theatre people, and it was just fantastic, fascinating to hear their stories.
Yeah, it's really fascinating for me to speak to older trans authors as well, and to speak to them about their experience, because when they were speaking to them, realizing that when they were my age, or when they were in their late 20s, early 30s, and realized they were trans, a lot of them started off as teachers, and they all just instantly lost their jobs because, or they either lost their jobs because they came out, or they didn't come out. That's why they transitioned when they were older, and then they became authors. And it's very humbling in a way to acknowledge just how fortunate we are in that respect, to be able to, the fact that I don't have to be concerned that my gender identity, you know, quite the opposite, that my gender identity will allow me to lose my job. And that's obviously still happens to this day in lots of places in this country and across the global south and across the West, but it's not as pointed. And I think that's really interesting to hear from elders. Yeah.
Thank you. And we've got some hands up. So Louise, we'll come over to you. Hi.
Hi, lovely to meet everybody. Lovely to meet you, Jamie. I'm absolutely loving the discussion that's been had in relation to sort of a very realistic relinquishing of control and about self-preservation in relation to the rhetoric that's out there about you. Do you have any tips or any advice on how you sort of maintain and touch base with that sort of great sense of integrity?
Thanks, Louise. It's an interesting one. For practicing those boundaries I spoke of. There has been experiences in my life, shall we say, that have warranted me to really analyze my practices as a human being in terms of how can I maintain a lifestyle that keeps me mentally secure, mentally sane, grounded, like you say, have integrity. And for me, that included adding in things into my life that calm me down. So whether that be, and I don't necessarily mean like drugs, I mean like practices such as a spiritual practice or a calming practice or just a slower pace of life. And obviously that's not always easy. But what I realized was that so much of my integrity or so much of my decision-making process was made from purely from a sense of self. I was like, I want this, I need this, I desire this, so I will go and get it. When I actually stripped it all back and was like, okay, what do I actually need? What am I grateful for? What am I, how can I help other people? When I really just like stripped it back, I realized I actually already have everything that I need. And if I don't, it means that there's less for me to need than what I think I need in terms of like material things or work and that is it's a lifelong process to get there. I'm not saying that I am perfect at that. No one is. And I've been working on that since January. But that allows me to stay calm and to have integrity and to make good decisions.
Thank you. Alan, Susie?
Sorry, a very loud ice cream van just went past, so I didn't want to icon for a second there.
Just jealous. I want one now.
Although my mum told me that they only play the music when they're out of ice cream, so I don't know if that's true. I did have something and I've lost it. When you first started building your brand, and probably also now, are there any people that you look to as an influence for this?
Yeah, I mean, I hear that you've had Lady Phyll in. Lady Phyll is a massive inspiration for me. Not necessarily, we've worked together and we know each other, but it's not like I almost like get a lot of inspiration from her, like as like radiation, or like she just radiates inspiration. Again, because of that intergenerational conversation that when you really hear about how her and the group in can't remember where it was, but when they started UK Black Pride and how that began and what happened as a result of her starting that, just put so much into perspective. I think currently now, equally, people that inspire me to continue are people that, this might come as a surprise, but people that are younger than me, that like truly don't care. Like I've had to learn how to not care and then learn again and then learn again. Whereas the generation that's coming up now, the generation that are in school now, inspire me because it makes me hopeful. You know, it makes me hopeful that we will live in a space where, you know, the conversations that are being had right now hopefully won't impact them in their future, or if they do, they won't be as kind of violent. But yeah, it's definitely that generational thing, the super young and the not super old. Phil's not old, but the older people.
Yeah, the young, I say the young people these days, that makes me sound ancient, but the generation that are still at school are incredible. I volunteer with a trans youth group, and they're just, like you say, they just don't care. They're amazing. They're all like parading around school in trans flags, and that is just, growing up in like rural Scotland, that was just not something that happened. They're amazing, and they know 100%. So much. Like they know more than me, and I'm almost 30 and doing a master's. So much.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
Definitely wasn't my kind of experience, or would have felt comfortable doing that at 15 growing up in Thurrock in Essex. Like definitely not. Definitely, you know, that feels like worlds ago. Alan, did you have a question?
Well, I want to kind of invite some of the rest of the audience to just maybe be a little bit queer and a little bit disruptive with the conversation right now, but for us to maybe utilize some of the technology that we have and the chat box to and I do this with my students, so stop me if this is me being a little bit out of control, but I would like to invite everyone to enter 1 or 2 or 3 words and then hit enter. We'll hit enter all at the same time, but 1 or 2 or 3 words that kind of speak to or encapsulate your own personal brand as you would describe yourself and your brand, whether it's personally or professionally. So maybe taking some of the ideas and thinking from tonight's talk and discussion, if you were to brand yourself in 3 words, what would those words be?
Love that. Who's gonna bite the bullet?
Are we counting down and doing it all at the same time?
Should we give Jamie the honor of counting down and saying hit the go button?
Okay, I'm gonna go from 10 just because 3 words is quite a lot. Okay. 8, 7, 6, 5. Joe, I hope you're writing your words. 4, 3. Andrew, 2. Faye, 1. People leaving. Share your words.
Wow. Okay. We've got some coming through. I got stuck.
That's okay, Joe.
It's not too late. It's not too late. Pop them in. Cool. We'll leave those coming in for a second, and we'll revisit them. I just want to talk about the importance of allyship, which you touched on recently. I'm not going to ask you how to be a good ally, but when we think about allies, definitely I 100% consider myself an ally, but I think I'm probably guilty of doing this. Is there a tendency for allies to focus on the challenges and being fiercely defensive and talking about lots of important things, such as kind of like pronouns? And one of my things that I always say is you don't always have to understand something to show compassion and kindness and acceptance. Is there a tendency for allies to lean too much on the challenges, struggles, and barriers, and they sometimes forget to celebrate the simple joys the joyful story and the happy stories around them of trans and non-binary people, and others, and you touched on recently I know in the podcast you mentioned about featuring those quite mundane day-to-day lives of trans and non-binary couples. Is there a tendency for allies to do that and kind of sometimes overlook a little bit of the joy?
Yeah, definitely. I think that there are two things that that allies do that I guess are traps of allyship. And I say this as someone, the majority of us are people who need allies and should be allies. Just allyship is not a one-way conversation. It's almost like I like to think of it, if it's not too crass, as one of those extension leads that has things on both sides. Because I need it as much as I need to give it. And it's important that what happens in that dialogue, like you say, is that when I'm being an ally to other people, or when people are being an ally to me, we don't just focus on the trauma or the negativity or the sadness of it. But equally, I think what is important is that we don't, like the other trap that I think comes with allyship is that we don't focus on ourselves too much. It can be very easy, and we've all done it, and I've definitely done it, of kind of getting so wrapped up in this idea of wanting to be a good ally that all you've essentially done is sit in your own mind. You've not actually thought about anyone else. You're thinking about how you can be good rather than how you can be useful or helpful, or like how you can actually just put these things into practice. And what that does is it almost like puts the car in stall. You don't move anywhere because you're just thinking about how you can be good. And there has to, that's why I think learning publicly and learning together is so important, because to actively be an ally, you have to mess up, because that's how you learn again. And yeah, it's not always comfortable and it's not always easy, but you have to do that. And you have to realize that the uncomfortability and the uneasiness that you feel is like 1% of what actually the feeling of the person who needs you feels. And also that it's a lifelong dedication. It's not something you can just do. It's something that you kind of then have, you own, and you nurture as you grow. It's not something you can complete. Yeah, great question.
Get over the discomfort, kind of, stick with it. And,
yeah, it's not easy. Like it is a real test of self. It's a real test of your ego as well. See whether or not you can really just put that to one side and be useful.
Thank you. Alan, I'm going to hand over to you to go through some of those words.
Yeah, it's nice to have that bit of input from people. The words that Neil's referring to are the comments that people put into the chat box. So people have described themselves as resilient, powerful, and kind, open, creative, angry, warmth, authentic, energy, hilarious, learning, private, queer, academic, overthinker, chaotic, open, tired, love the world, I got stuck, LOL.
We've also got neurodiverse, outgoing, and dynamic.
Fantastic. Oh, did I miss?
No, it came through privately. But...
great. Fantastic. Yeah, so thanks everyone for participating in that way. Are there any final questions or comments, either Jamie or Susie or anyone from the audience or Neil?
No, for me, it was just, this has been a real learning thing. Jamie, I approached you with an idea of kind of like, with a talk about creating your personal brand. And I felt very educated that you kind of flipped that on its head, because I kind of wanted you to give a talk originally about how you've how you've used your gender and sexuality and expression into your personal brand. And actually that very much flipped it on its head. And when I was writing the description following that first conversation, very much included creating your personal brand on your own terms. And so that was a real schooling piece for me, which I'm very grateful for. So yeah, that's all from me.
Thanks, Neil. Yeah, no, this has been really lovely. It's been some great questions. I'm really glad that, you know, we've had this chat, we've had the podcast. So essentially, if you desire to listen to me and Susie again, you may do that on the lovely podcast. But yeah, it's been absolutely lovely. Some really great insights, some great questions. Thank you for hosting my face, and hopefully soon you can get the rest in person when everything is back up.
Thank you.
Great.
But that's all from me. Alan,
Great.
I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, so Susie, did you want to jump in on anything there before we wrap and fold?
No, I really think everyone said everything that I was going to say, but in a much nicer way. So thanks very much, Jamie, for talking to me twice in a week. Really appreciate it. It was a really, really good chat.
Well, and so thank you to both of you. You know, for me, there were some themes coming up tonight around authenticity and how we maybe can manage authenticity and work towards authenticity. And I think Louise, when she asked her question, brought in the idea of integrity. And I think these things work really well and are very informative, not just for personal brand, but I think that we can amplify this to the brands of our organizations and the brands of our outputs and our activism and our communities as well. So I really, I'm going to take away some thinking from tonight around authenticity and around using boundaries to create that authentic brand and that authentic self as well. So there's writing by Brene Brown, who talks about the idea of what you can share about yourself, and that being completely open with people and in public isn't the same as being authentic. And you touched on this earlier, the idea, that distinction between honest versus truth. And I think there's something really, really very simple and elegant about thinking about the roles and the expectations that we have for ourselves and that other people create for us, and then the kind of cycle of other people's expectations then really performatively shaping our own expectations for ourselves, and then how we, again, I use that word performatively, but we shape their expectations of us, and it becomes this whole copy without an original. And when we talk about personal brand, there's something really very, again, I'm going to say informative and meaningful for us as queer people, as LGBTQ people, as non-normative people, or as people in a power minority, however that works out, and for whatever kind of time-bounded moment that exists. But for us to be thinking about that message of whose expectations are we working towards, and what is that product or that self or that identity that we want to get to and arrive at, that will be a copy without an original when we finally get there. So much to take away and think about from tonight. Thank you to all of our guests and participants in the audience. Thank you to Neil for hosting and organizing, to Susie for comparing and responding to the talk, and especially to Jamie Windust for joining us tonight as our special guest. So thank you all, and please feel free to come back to us again for some of our events in the new academic year. We're taking a little break for August, and then might be back in September, but probably definitely look for us in October.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.